Every time you announce a goal, something invisible happens inside you. You get a little hit of satisfaction, a small reward just for saying it out loud. Your brain treats the announcement like partial completion. It feels good to be seen as someone who's going somewhere. But here's the problem. That good feeling steals energy from the actual work. You've spent your motivation on the wrong thing. I've watched people destroy their own dreams simply by talking about them too early, too often, to too many people. The goal dies in the announcement. And nobody tells you that. You know, I want to spend some time with you today talking about something that most people get completely backwards. It's about goals, yes, but it's more than that. It's about the nature of progress itself, about how transformation really happens, about the difference between looking like you're going somewhere and actually arriving. Because here's what I've noticed over all my years of teaching and observing human behavior. We've become a culture of announcers. We announce everything. We broadcast our intentions. We publish our plans. We turn our private commitments into public spectacles. And we think this is helping us. We think this is creating accountability, building support, generating momentum. But what if I told you it's doing the exact opposite? What if the very act of announcing your goals is sabotaging your ability to achieve them? What if your silence, your privacy, your willingness to work without witnesses is actually the secret to real, lasting transformation? Now, I know that goes against everything you've been taught. I know the modern advice is to share your goals, to tell everyone, to create external accountability. But I'm going to ask you to consider a different path, an older path, a quieter path. The path that builders, artists, farmers, and every person who's ever actually finished something meaningful has walked. Let me explain why this matters so much. When you announce a goal, when you tell people what you're planning to do, something happens in your brain. There's a chemical reaction, a release of dopamine. You get a little reward, a small hit of satisfaction, just from the act of declaring your intention. Now that might sound harmless. It might even sound good. But here's what nobody tells you. That dopamine hit, that good feeling you get from announcing, is the same reward your brain would give you for actually making progress. It's like your brain can't tell the difference between talking about doing something and actually doing it. So you get the satisfaction without the work. It's like eating dessert before dinner. You've satisfied the craving without earning it. And once that craving is satisfied, even just a little bit, your motivation to do the actual work decreases, the goal becomes less urgent, less compelling, less necessary. You've already gotten what you were really seeking, recognition, approval, the feeling of being seen as someone who's going somewhere. And now the hard work of actually going there feels less important. I've seen this pattern destroy more dreams than I can count. Good people, sincere people, people with real talent and genuine desire. They get excited about something they want to do, something they want to become. And in their excitement, they start talking. They tell their family, their friends, their co-workers. They post about it. They explain their vision. They describe their plans. And every time they tell someone, they get a little hit, a little reward. Oh, that's great. Good for you. I can't wait to see how that turns out. And those responses feel good. They feel like progress. They feel like support. But they're not. They're theft. They're stealing from the energy you need to actually do the work. Because here's what happens next. After the announcement, after the excitement, after the initial wave of encouragement, you have to actually start. You have to sit down and do the work, the hard work, the boring work, the work that nobody sees and nobody celebrates. And suddenly, it's not as exciting anymore because you've already spent your excitement on the announcement. You've already received your applause. Now you're just left with the difficult, unglamorous reality of showing up day after day with no audience, no encouragement, no recognition, and most people quit right there. Not because they didn't have the ability, not because they didn't have the desire, but because they spent their motivation on the wrong thing. They spent it on looking like they were going somewhere instead of actually going there. Now, let me tell you about two neighbors I once knew. This story illustrates the principle better than any explanation I could give. These two men lived right next door to each other. Both decided around the same time that they wanted to plant gardens. Both were excited about the idea. Both had good intentions. The first neighbor, let's call him Tom, was thrilled about his garden project. At the neighborhood barbecue that spring, he told everyone about his plans. He described the tomatoes he was going to grow, the rows of lettuce, the herb spiral he'd been researching, the raised beds he was going to build. He had diagrams, he had seed catalogs, he had the whole thing mapped out in his mind. People were impressed. They asked him questions. When would he start? What varieties was he planting? Had he tested his soil? Tom loved these conversations. He felt like a gardener. He felt knowledgeable, important. He went home from that barbecue feeling good about himself, feeling like he'd taken a real step toward his goal. The second neighbor, let's call him Frank, had the same idea. He wanted a garden too. But when people asked him at the barbecue what he'd been up to, he just said he was keeping busy with some projects around the house. That's all. He didn't elaborate. He didn't explain. And honestly, nobody pressed him for details. People are generally more interested in those who are willing to talk than those who stay quiet. So Tom became known as the guy who's planting that amazing garden. Frank was just Frank. Now, all summer long, Tom kept talking. He gave updates. I'm working on the design. I'm ordering materials. I'm waiting for the right time to start. It's been too hot, you know? Don't want to stress the plants. He always had a reason for why he hadn't begun yet. Always an explanation for the delay. But the explanations were delivered with such confidence, such knowledge, that people remained impressed. Tom knew so much about gardening. Surely when he finally got started, it was going to be spectacular. Frank, meanwhile, just worked. Early in the morning, before the sun got too hot, he was out there, turning soil, amending the earth, planting seeds, watering, not making a show of it, not updating anyone on his progress, just working. Some weeks he'd be out there every evening after dinner, pulling weeds, staking tomatoes, checking for pests. Nobody really noticed. People would wave as they drove by, but they didn't stop to ask how it was going. Frank didn't look like he was doing anything impressive. He just looked like a guy quietly working in his yard. By midsummer, something interesting was happening. Tom was still talking about his garden. The project had grown in his mind. Now he was planning to include raised beds, a drip irrigation system, and maybe even a small greenhouse for starting seedlings next year. He joined an online gardening forum and was sharing all his research. He felt very involved in gardening, very connected to the community of gardeners. Frank's garden was producing tomatoes, cucumbers, lettuce, peppers. Nothing fancy, nothing Instagram worthy, just food, real food, growing in real soil, being harvested and eaten. By autumn, Tom's yard looked exactly the same as it had in spring. The garden never materialized. But Tom had great stories, great explanations. The soil wasn't quite right. The weather didn't cooperate. He needed to do more research on pest management. Next year, though, next year was going to be the year. He'd learned so much this season. Next year, he'd be ready. Frank's family had eaten fresh vegetables all season. He'd given away bags of tomatoes to neighbors. His kids had learned to recognize when a cucumber was ready to pick. Nothing dramatic, nothing worth announcing, just results. Quiet, consistent, undeniable results. And here's what I want you to notice. Tom felt like a gardener. He talked like a gardener. He thought like a gardener. He had all the knowledge of a gardener, but he never grew anything. Frank never called himself a gardener, never claimed any expertise. He just grew food. The doing was the identity. The results were the announcement. Now, you might think this is just a story about gardening, but it's really about how we spend our life force. Every one of us has a limited amount of energy, attention, and motivation. It's finite, it's precious, and we get to choose how we spend it. Do we spend it on the appearance of progress or the reality of progress? Do we spend it talking about what we're going to do or doing it? Most people don't make this choice consciously. They just follow the pattern they've learned. And in our current culture, that pattern is to announce, broadcast, share, and update. We've been taught that visibility equals validity. That if nobody knows about it, it doesn't count. That our progress only matters if it's witnessed and acknowledged. But that's backwards. The truth is almost exactly the opposite. Your most important progress happens in private. It happens in the moments when nobody's watching, when there's no audience, no applause, no recognition. That's where real transformation occurs. Let me tell you about something I learned from a man I once knew. He was a sculptor, worked with wood primarily, beautiful pieces, real art, the kind of work that takes months to complete. And he was serious about his craft. It wasn't a hobby for him, it was a practice, a discipline, a way of life. I got to know him over the course of several years, and one thing I noticed was how private he was about his work. His workshop was in his garage, and he kept it locked. Not because he was hiding anything, but because he needed that space to be protected, sacred even. He didn't show people works in progress. He didn't explain what he was working on. He didn't post pictures of his latest project. He just worked. And I'll be honest, it puzzled me at first. Here was this talented man creating beautiful things, and almost nobody knew about it until the piece was finished. No process videos, no behind-the-scenes updates, no building anticipation, just silence. And then, eventually, a completed sculpture. One day, I asked him about it. I said, "Why are you so private about your work? Why don't you share the process? People would love to see how you create these pieces." And what he told me changed how I thought about creativity, about goals, about the whole process of becoming. He said, if I describe the sculpture before it exists, I've already limited it. My words create a picture in people's minds, and then I feel pressure to match that picture instead of following where the wood wants to go. The work suffers when I try to explain it too early. He went on to explain that in the early stages of a piece, everything is possible. The form is still emerging. He's in dialogue with the material, discovering what it wants to become. But the moment he puts that process into words, the moment he describes his vision to someone else, something closes. The possibility narrows. The pressure to match the description replaces the freedom to discover. And then he said something I'll never forget. Every person I tell becomes a voice in my head while I'm working. Is it what they expected? Will they approve? Does it match what I said? The work becomes a performance instead of a practice. That hit me hard because I realized he was describing something that extends far beyond woodworking. He was describing the fundamental problem with premature disclosure. When you announce your goals, when you explain your vision, when you describe what you're going to become, you invite people into your head. And now you're not just doing the work, you're managing their expectations. You're performing for an audience instead of practicing your craft. Your goal becomes something you have to defend, explain, and justify instead of something you simply do. And that shift, subtle as it sounds, changes everything. I started applying this principle to my own life. I stopped announcing my plans. I stopped explaining what I was working on. I stopped updating people on my progress. And something remarkable happened. I actually started finishing things. Without the pressure of other people's expectations, I could experiment freely. I could fail without embarrassment. I could change direction without having to explain why my current path didn't match what I'd announced 3 months earlier. I could be messy and uncertain and human without an audience documenting every step. My progress became mine again. My journey became private. And in that privacy, I found freedom. Freedom to be a beginner. Freedom to struggle. Freedom to discover who I was becoming without having to explain it to anyone else. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking, but what about accountability? Don't I need other people to keep me on track? Won't I just quit if nobody knows what I'm doing? And that's a fair question. It's the question I get most often when I talk about this principle. Because we've been taught that external accountability is essential, that we need other people watching to keep us honest, that we'll slack off if nobody's checking on us. But here's what I've learned. If the only thing keeping you on track is fear of looking foolish in front of others, you're building on sand. That's not real commitment. That's just social pressure. And it might work for a while, but it won't sustain you. Because what happens when people stop asking? When they forget about your goal? When they move on to caring about something else? Your motivation evaporates. Real accountability is internal. It's between you and the person you're becoming. It's between you and your own integrity. It's between you and the work itself. Let me explain what I mean by that. When you're accountable to yourself, you show up because you said you would, not because someone else is checking, not because you'll be embarrassed if you don't, but because you're keeping a promise you made to yourself. And that kind of accountability runs deep. It builds character. It creates self-respect. When you rely on external accountability, you're essentially saying, I can't trust myself to do this unless other people are watching. That's a terrible foundation for any meaningful change. Because the moment the watchers disappear, you disappear too. But when you build internal accountability, you're saying, I'm the kind of person who does what I say I'll do, even when nobody's watching, even when it's hard, even when I don't feel like it. I'm that person. And here's the beautiful truth about internal accountability. It's always there. It doesn't depend on anyone else's attention or approval. It's just you, your word, and your willingness to honor it. Now, I'm not saying you should never tell anyone about your goals. I'm not suggesting you become completely isolated or secretive. That's not what this is about. There's a difference between announcement and partnership. Let me clarify this because it's important. Announcement is broadcasting to the crowd. It's posting on social media. It's telling everyone at the party. It's making your goal a public spectacle. It's seeking validation from the audience. It's fishing for encouragement, approval, and recognition from people who have no stake in your success and no understanding of your journey. Partnership is different. Partnership is confiding in one or two people who are actually qualified to walk with you. People who've done what you're trying to do. People who understand the work. People who won't flatter you or doubt you. They'll just ask, what did you do today? Not, how are you feeling about it? Not, are you still excited? But what did you do? You don't need accountability to the masses. You need accountability to someone who understands the path, someone who's walked it, someone who knows that progress isn't linear, that motivation comes and goes, that showing up is what matters. And here's another key distinction. You tell them after you've already started, not before, after. After you've already proven to yourself that you're serious, after the habit is beginning to form, after you've demonstrated through action, not intention, that you're committed. Because if you tell someone before you start, you're still just announcing, you're still seeking approval for your intention rather than earning respect through your action. But if you tell someone after you've been showing up for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month, now you're reporting on reality. You're sharing evidence. You're building on a foundation of actual work. And the person you choose to tell, that one person, should be someone who will hold you accountable to your actions, not your explanations. Someone who won't accept excuses. Someone who loves you enough to tell you the truth. Did you do the work today? Yes or no? That's accountability. Everything else is just conversation. Most people can't help you. They mean well, but they don't know the path. They haven't walked it. Their advice is based on fear, not experience. Their questions will be things like, are you sure that's a good idea? Or, what if it doesn't work out? Or, don't you think you should wait until you're more prepared? And those questions, however well-intentioned, plant doubt. They slow you down. They make you second-guess yourself. You need someone who knows, someone who's been there, someone who understands that the beginning is supposed to be messy and uncertain. Someone who won't be shocked when you struggle. And if you have that person, treasure them. Let them be your accountability. Let that be enough. But most people don't have that person. Most people are surrounded by folks who care about them but don't understand the work. And if that's you, then you're better off working in silence, better off building your accountability internally, better off letting your results speak rather than seeking permission from people who can't possibly understand what you're trying to do. So let me give you a framework, a way to think about this in practical terms. Because I don't want this to just be philosophy. I want you to be able to apply this immediately. Here's how I break it down into phases. 3 phases. Each one matters. Each one builds on the last. Phase 1 is what I call the silent start. This is the first 30 days. During this phase, you don't tell anyone. Not your spouse, not your best friend, not your accountability group. Nobody. This is between you and you. You're proving something to yourself in this phase. You're proving that you can show up, that you can do the work when nobody's watching, that you can keep a commitment you made to yourself without external pressure. This phase is hard because you're fighting the urge to announce. You're fighting the urge to get credit for your intention. Every day that you show up and do the work without telling anyone, you're building something. You're building self-trust. You're building integrity. You're building the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you're the kind of person who does what you say you'll do. And here's what's beautiful about this phase. You're also discovering whether this goal is real. Because if you can't show up for it when nobody's watching, it probably wasn't a genuine goal in the first place. It was probably just a fantasy, a wish, a nice idea, but not something you're actually willing to work for. So many of our announced goals fall into this category. They sound good. They make us feel good when we talk about them. But we're not actually willing to do the work. And the silent start phase reveals that. It separates the real commitments from the wishful thinking. Phase 2 is what I call quiet consistency. This is days 30 through 90. You're past the initial excitement now. The newness is worn off. This is where most people quit. Because it's not exciting anymore. It's just work. The same work. Every day, and nobody's applauding. But if you've made it this far, you're building something real. The habit is forming. The change is happening. It's still fragile, don't misunderstand me, but it's real. You can feel it. You know you're different than you were 30 days ago. At this point, you might consider confiding in one person, that one qualified person I mentioned earlier, not to announce, not to seek approval, but to bring them into partnership. To say, I've been working on something for the past month. I'm starting to see progress. I could use someone who understands the work to check in with me occasionally. Notice the language there. You're not asking permission. You're not seeking encouragement. You're reporting on something that's already happening and inviting someone to witness your continued commitment. But even in this phase, you're still not broadcasting. You're not posting about it. You're not making it public. You're protecting the work, sheltering it, giving it space to grow stronger before you expose it to the wind and weather of public opinion. Phase 3 is what I call visible results. This typically happens somewhere after day 90, though the timing varies depending on what you're working on. This is when the change becomes undeniable. When people start noticing, without you saying anything, when they see something different in you, when they ask, have you lost weight? Or you seem different lately, what's going on? Or what are you doing differently? And this is where it gets fun. Because now you don't have to convince anyone. Now you're not defending your intention or explaining your plan. Now you're simply being asked about something that's already real, already visible, already undeniable. And here's how you respond. Simply, I've been working on some things. That's it. You don't need to give them your whole story. You don't need to explain your process. You don't need to turn your private journey into a public teaching moment. You just acknowledge that, yes, you've been working on something, and the results are speaking for themselves. Because by this point, you've learned the most important lesson. The work is the explanation. The results are the announcement. The changed life is the testimony. You don't need to describe the harvest when people can see the crops. You don't need to explain the sculpture when it's standing right in front of them. You don't need to talk about your transformation when your life is demonstrably different. Now let me address something that I know is on some of your minds. You're thinking, but I've announced goals before and I followed through. So this can't be universally true. And you're right. It's not universal. Some people can announce and still follow through. Some people thrive with external accountability. Some people are motivated by public commitment. I'm not saying that's impossible. What I'm saying is this. For most people, most of the time, premature announcement drains energy rather than creating it. For most people, the habit of announcing has become a substitute for achieving. For most people, the social media post about starting a new habit becomes the accomplishment instead of the habit itself. And even for those people who can announce and still follow through, I'd ask, would you have followed through better without the announcement? Would you have had more energy for the actual work if you hadn't spent any on the performance? Would the journey have been more authentic if it hadn't been documented for an audience? I'm not interested in what's possible. I'm interested in what's optimal. And optimal, in my experience, is quiet work that speaks through results. Let me give you another example. I've known many people over the years who decided to write books. Writing a book is a perfect example of this principle in action because it's a long-term project that requires sustained effort over months or years. And I've noticed a pattern. The people who announce I'm writing a book on day one rarely finish. They spend so much energy talking about the book, describing the book, explaining their process, updating people on their word count, that they exhaust themselves before the work is done. The book becomes more about the identity of being a writer than about the actual writing. But the people who just write, who sit down day after day and put words on the page without announcing it, they finish, they're not performing the act of writing. They're just writing. And one day, they have a completed manuscript, and then they can say, I wrote a book. Not, I'm writing a book, or I'm going to write a book, but I wrote a book. Past tense. Finished. Done. There's tremendous power in being able to speak about your accomplishments in the past tense. It means you did the thing. You didn't just intend to do it, or plan to do it, or announce you were going to do it. You did it. And the path to speaking in the past tense is to work in the present tense. Quietly, consistently, without announcement. Now I want to talk about something that might be uncomfortable. I want to talk about why people want to announce their goals in the first place. Because if we're honest about the motivation, we might discover something important about ourselves. Most of the time when we announce a goal, we're not really seeking accountability, we're seeking approval. We want people to see us as the kind of person who sets goals, the kind of person who's working on themselves, the kind of person who's ambitious, disciplined, growth-oriented. We want the identity without the work. And in our current culture, you can have that. You can build an entire identity around your intentions. You can be known as the person who's always working on something without ever actually finishing anything. Because the appearance of progress, the performance of ambition, the announcement of intention, these things are rewarded with likes, comments, encouragement, and approval. But here's what nobody tells you, that approval is empty. It feels good in the moment, but it doesn't sustain you. It doesn't build you. It doesn't transform you. It's junk food for the ego. Quick hit, no nutrition. Real satisfaction comes from a different source. It comes from doing the work, from keeping a promise you made to yourself, from becoming someone you respect, from looking in the mirror and knowing you showed up when nobody was watching. That's the food that actually nourishes you. And you can't get that from an announcement. You can only get it from the work. So if you find yourself wanting to announce a goal, I'd encourage you to pause and ask yourself why. What am I really seeking here? Am I seeking genuine partnership and accountability from someone qualified to give it? Or am I seeking approval from an audience? Am I trying to build external pressure because I don't trust myself to follow through? Or am I just excited and wanting to share that excitement? None of these motivations are evil. I'm not judging you. I'm just asking you to be honest about what you're really after. Because if what you really want is transformation, if what you really want is to become someone different, to achieve something meaningful, then you need to protect your energy. You need to invest it in the work, not the performance. Think of it this way. Imagine you have a battery of motivation, energy, and commitment. It's not infinite. It's not bottomless. It's a real resource with real limits. Now, every time you announce your goal, every time you explain your plan, every time you update people on your progress, you're draining that battery a little bit. You're spending energy on communication instead of action. And the cruel irony is that the communication feels productive. It feels like you're doing something. It feels like progress, but it's not. It's consumption. You're consuming your own energy and getting nothing back except approval and temporary good feelings. The wise approach is to conserve that battery, to spend it only on the work itself, to let every bit of energy flow into action rather than explanation. And when the work is done, when the results are visible, then you can talk about it. Then the communication doesn't drain your battery, it's just describing what the battery already powered. Let me tell you about a young man I once mentored. He came to me because he wanted to get in shape, wanted to lose weight, build some muscle, feel better about himself. Good goals, worthy goals. And he was sincere. I could tell he genuinely wanted to change. The first thing he did was join a gym. Fine. The second thing he did was post about it on social media. Day one of my fitness journey, with a picture of himself in the gym parking lot. And immediately, the likes and comments started rolling in. Good for you. You've got this. Can't wait to see your progress. He felt great. He felt supported. He felt like he'd already accomplished something. And in a way, he'd successfully announced his intention and received approval for it. But then he had to actually go to the gym, and it was hard and boring, and nobody was there cheering him on, and his muscles hurt, and he didn't see results immediately. And after a week, he posted another update. Week 1 done, feeling sore but committed, more likes, more encouragement. By week 3, he'd gone to the gym maybe 5 times total. By week 6, he'd stopped going altogether. But he never posted about quitting. He just quietly let it fade away. And 6 months later, when I saw him again, I asked him how the fitness journey was going. He looked embarrassed. Yeah, I kind of fell off that. Life got busy. I'm planning to start again next month. Planning to start again. That phrase is the anthem of people who announce too early. They're always planning to start, planning to restart, planning to really commit this time. Because the announcement gave them the satisfaction without requiring the work. Now contrast that with another young man I knew. Similar situation. Wanted to get in shape, joined a gym. But he didn't tell anyone, didn't post about it, didn't make a big deal out of it. He just started going 3 times a week. Then 4, then 5, sometimes 6. It was hard for him too. Of course it was. His muscles hurt too. He got discouraged too. But he didn't have an audience expecting updates. He didn't have people asking, how's the gym going? He didn't have to manage anyone's expectations or answer anyone's questions. He just had to show up. And so he did. 6 months later, people started noticing, have you been working out? You look different. What's your secret? And he'd just smile and say, yeah, I've been hitting the gym for a few months. No big story, no detailed explanation, just a simple acknowledgement of the work. The difference between these 2 young men wasn't ability, wasn't desire, it was approach. One spent his energy on announcement, the other spent his energy on action. One sought approval from the crowd, the other sought approval from the mirror. And I want you to think about which approach serves you better. Not just in fitness, but in everything. In your career, in your relationships, in your personal growth, in your spiritual life, in every area where you want to improve, to grow, to become something more than you currently are you spending your energy on the appearance of progress or the reality of progress? Are you more concerned with being seen as someone who's working on themselves or actually doing the work? Are you seeking approval from others or building respect for yourself? These are not small questions. These questions determine whether you'll look back on your life and see a trail of announced intentions or a trail of real accomplishments. Whether you'll have stories about what you meant to do or evidence of what you actually did. Now, let me talk about something else that happens when you work in silence. Something I didn't anticipate when I first started practicing this principle. When you stop announcing your goals, when you stop seeking external validation, when you work privately and quietly, you develop a different relationship with yourself. You start to trust yourself more. Because you're keeping promises to yourself, you're showing yourself that you're capable, that you're reliable, that when you say you're going to do something, even if it's just a promise you make silently in your own heart, you follow through. And this self-trust becomes a foundation for everything else in your life. Because if you can't trust yourself, who can you trust? If you break promises to yourself, why would you expect to keep promises to others? If you can't rely on yourself to show up when nobody's watching, how can you rely on yourself in the big moments, the important moments, the moments that really matter? Self-trust is earned. It's not given. It's not automatic. You earn it through consistent action, through doing what you said you'd do, through honoring your commitments, even when they're difficult, especially when they're difficult. And the beautiful thing about building self-trust is that it compounds. The first few times you show up for yourself, it's hard, you doubt yourself, you wonder if you'll quit. But each time you show up, you're adding evidence, you're building a case. And eventually, the evidence becomes overwhelming. You look at your track record and you think, I'm someone who shows up. I'm someone who finishes things. I'm someone who can be trusted. And once you believe that about yourself, everything changes. Because now you're not operating from hope or intention or wishful thinking. You're operating from evidence, from proof, from a foundation of demonstrated capability. But you can't build that foundation through announcement. You can only build it through action, through quiet, consistent, private action that nobody sees but you. Let me tell you something else I've learned. When you work in silence, you also protect yourself from one of the most destructive forces in human life, the opinions of people who don't understand your journey. Not everyone wants you to succeed. I know that sounds harsh, but it's true. Some people are threatened by your transformation. Your growth reminds them of their stagnation. Your discipline highlights their lack of it. Your progress makes them uncomfortable because it forces them to confront their own choices. And these people, often people close to you, people who claim to care about you, will discourage you. Not always overtly. Sometimes it's subtle. A skeptical look, a dismissive comment, a joke at your expense. Oh, you're still doing that? You really think that's going to work? I knew someone who tried that once. Didn't work out for him. These comments, these little seeds of doubt, they're destructive. Not because they're true, but because they take root in your mind. They become voices you hear when you're tired, when you're discouraged, when you're questioning whether this is all worth it. But if you don't announce your goals, if you don't invite these people into your process, they can't plant those seeds. They can't discourage you because they don't know what you're working on. They can't question your commitment because they're not watching your journey. You're protected, sheltered, free to grow without interference. And when they finally see the results, when your transformation is undeniable, their opinions don't matter anymore because you're not seeking their approval. You're not asking for their validation. You're simply being different, being better, being more than you were. And that speaks for itself. This is why I say silence isn't secrecy. Secrecy implies hiding something wrong, something shameful. But silence is strategic, it's protective, it's wise. You're not hiding. You're just choosing not to invite spectators into the arena while you're learning to fight. Because make no mistake, transformation is a fight. It's a fight against your old habits, your old patterns, your old identity. It's a fight against comfort, against ease, against the path of least resistance. And you need all your strength for that fight. You can't afford to waste it defending your choices to people who don't understand the battle. Now I want to address something for those of you who are thinking, but I'm excited about my goals. I want to share my excitement. Are you saying I'm not allowed to be excited? No, I'm not saying that at all. Excitement is good. Excitement is fuel. But there's a difference between feeling excited and broadcasting your excitement. You can be intensely excited about what you're working on and still keep it private. The excitement doesn't require an audience. In fact, I'd argue that private excitement is purer. It's more sustainable. When your excitement is just for you, when it's just the pure joy of working on something meaningful, it doesn't need to be fed by external response. It doesn't depend on likes or comments or encouragement. It's self-sustaining. Public excitement, on the other hand, needs constant feeding. You post about your goal, you get a response, you feel excited, but then that fades, so you post again. You give another update. You seek another hit of validation. And before you know it, you're more excited about the social engagement than the actual goal. You're performing excitement instead of feeling it. Keep your excitement private. Let it be a flame inside you. Let it warm you during the hard days. Let it pull you forward when you don't feel like showing up. But don't broadcast it. Don't perform it. Don't turn it into content for other people's consumption. Your excitement is fuel. Use it for the journey, not the announcement. Let me give you a practical framework now. Something you can implement immediately. Because I don't want this to just be theory. I want you to walk away from this with a clear path forward. First, identify your most important goal right now. Not 10 goals. Not 5. 1. The one that matters most. The one that if you accomplished it would change everything else. Take a moment and identify that goal clearly in your mind. Got it? Good. Now, here's what you're going to do. You're going to commit to 30 days of complete silence about this goal. 30 days. Not a word to anyone. Not a post. Not a casual mention. Nothing. If someone asks what you've been up to, be vague. Just working on some personal things. Keeping busy with some projects. That's it. You don't owe anyone an explanation. You don't need to share more than that. For these 30 days, your only job is to show up and do the work, whatever that work is. Maybe it's writing 500 words a day. Maybe it's going to the gym 3 times a week. Maybe it's reading for an hour before bed. Maybe it's practicing a skill. Maybe it's building a business. Whatever your goal requires, do that, but do it silently. And here's the crucial part. Track your progress privately. Get a journal, a notebook, a document on your computer, something private. And every day, write down what you did, not how you felt about it, not whether it was hard or easy, just what you did, the facts. the evidence. Day 1, wrote 700 words. Day 2, went to gym, did 30 minutes cardio. Day 3, read for 45 minutes. Simple. Factual. Private. This private tracking serves 2 purposes. First, it keeps you honest. You can't lie to yourself when the evidence is right there. Either you did the work or you didn't. Second, it builds your case. It shows you that you're capable, that you're reliable, that you're someone who follows through. At the end of 30 days, look at your log. Look at the evidence you've accumulated and ask yourself, am I proud of this? Did I show up consistently? Did I do what I said I would do? If the answer is yes, congratulations. You've just proven something important to yourself. You've proven that you can commit to something and follow through without external pressure, without public accountability, without anyone watching. That's powerful. That's the foundation of everything else. If the answer is no, if you didn't show up consistently, that's valuable information too. It tells you that maybe this goal isn't as important to you as you thought. Maybe it was just a wish, not a real commitment, and that's okay. Better to know that now than after you've announced it to the world and then had to quietly quit. But here's the thing. Most people who try this 30-day silence discover that they're capable of more than they thought. Because without the energy drain of announcement, without the pressure of external expectations, they're free to just do the work. And the work, it turns out, is easier than the performance. After 30 days, you have a choice. You can continue in silence for another 30, another 60, another 90 days, or you can bring one person into partnership, one qualified person who understands the work. And you can say, I've been working on this for 30 days. I'd value having someone check in with me. Would you be willing to do that? Notice you're not asking permission. You're not seeking approval. You're reporting on something that's already real and inviting partnership going forward. But even at this stage, you're not broadcasting. You're not making it public. You're still protecting the work, still giving it space to grow stronger before you expose it to public opinion, and you continue this way until the results are undeniable, until people start noticing without you saying anything, until the transformation is visible enough that questions come naturally. And when they do, you answer simply, yeah, I've been working on some things, that's all. No big announcement, no detailed explanation, just acknowledgement. The work speaks, the results announce. Your changed life testifies. Now let me tell you about one more benefit of working in silence. It's something I didn't expect, but have come to deeply appreciate. When you work privately, when you keep your goals to yourself, you develop a kind of quiet confidence. It's different from the loud confidence that comes from external validation. It's deeper, more grounded, more real. This quiet confidence comes from knowing, from having evidence that you can trust yourself, from having a private history of showing up, doing hard things, following through. Nobody else knows about this history, but you do, and that's enough. This confidence doesn't need to announce itself. It doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. It just is. It radiates from you naturally. People sense it even if they can't name it. There's something different about a person who's done the work in private, something solid, something real. Contrast that with the confidence that comes from external validation. That confidence is fragile. It depends on constant reinforcement. It needs to be fed by likes, comments, approval, encouragement. When those things disappear, the confidence collapses. It's built on sand. But the confidence that comes from private work is built on bedrock. It's built on evidence. It's built on the undeniable truth that you are someone who does what you say you will do. And nobody can take that from you. I've been teaching these principles for many years now, and I can always tell the difference between people who've built external confidence and people who've built internal confidence. The externally confident people need to talk about themselves. They need to remind you of their accomplishments. They need you to know they're doing well, working hard, making progress. The internally confident people don't need any of that. They're comfortable with silence. They're comfortable letting their life speak for itself. They don't need to convince you of anything because they've already convinced themselves. And ironically, people trust the internally confident people more because there's no desperation there. No neediness, no performance, just quiet competence. This is what you're building when you work in silence. Not just the accomplishment of your goal, but the deeper transformation of becoming someone who doesn't need external validation. Someone who's comfortable with their own company. Someone who can be trusted, starting with trusting themselves. Let me address one more concern I hear often. Some people worry that if they don't announce their goals, they won't have any support. They worry they'll feel alone in the journey. They worry they'll lack encouragement when things get hard. And I understand that concern. We're social creatures. We need connection. We need to feel like we're not alone. That's human. That's normal. But here's what I've discovered. The support you get from announcing your goals is often superficial. It's people liking your post. People commenting, "You got this." People saying they're proud of you. And that feels good in the moment, but it doesn't actually help you show up tomorrow. It doesn't make the work easier. It doesn't give you the discipline you need when you don't feel like doing it. Real support looks different. Real support is having one person who knows you're struggling and shows up anyway. One person who texts you on the days you want to quit. One person who's done the work themselves and can remind you it's worth it. And you can have that without announcing to the world. You can have one trusted friend, one mentor, one partner who knows what you're working on. That's enough. That's actually better than a crowd of cheerleaders who don't understand the work. The question isn't whether you need support. The question is what kind of support actually serves you. And in my experience, quiet support from someone qualified is infinitely more valuable than loud encouragement from the masses. So don't confuse loneliness with privacy. You can work privately and still have meaningful support. You just have to be selective about who you invite into your process. Now, as we come toward the end of our time together, I want to circle back to where we started. Remember that feeling you get when you announce a goal, that little hit of satisfaction, that sense of accomplishment just from declaring your intention? I want you to start recognizing that feeling for what it is. A trick, a false reward. Your brain trying to give you credit for something you haven't done yet. And every time you feel that urge to announce, that urge to share, that urge to broadcast your plans, I want you to pause. Ask yourself, why do I want to share this right now? What am I really seeking? Am I seeking approval, validation, recognition, or am I genuinely looking for partnership from someone who can help? Most of the time, if you're honest, you'll realize you're seeking the approval, the validation, the good feeling that comes from being seen as someone who's working on themselves. And once you realize that, you can make a conscious choice. You can choose to keep that energy, to save it for the work, to invest it in actually becoming the person you want to be instead of performing the appearance of becoming. And every time you make that choice, you're building something. You're building discipline, self-control, internal validation. You're becoming someone who doesn't need the crowd's approval to move forward. Someone who can walk alone when necessary. Someone who's comfortable with their own company and their own commitment. That's rare. That's valuable. That's the kind of person who actually achieves things. Because here's the ultimate truth. The world is full of people announcing goals, full of people talking about what they're going to do, full of people performing transformation without ever transforming. But the world is desperately short on people who just do the work, who show up quietly, who build in private, who let their results speak. Be one of those people. Don't tell anyone your goals. Let the results speak. Work in silence. Build in private. Transform yourself where nobody's watching. And then, when the time is right, when the work is done, when the transformation is undeniable, step forward with quiet confidence. People will ask you how you did it. They'll want to know your secret. And you can smile and tell them the truth. I just did the work. No big strategy, no complex system, no revolutionary approach, just work. Consistent, private, unglamorous work. The kind of work that doesn't photograph well, that doesn't get likes, that doesn't trend, but the kind of work that actually changes lives. Your life will become the announcement. Your transformation will be the testimony. Your results will be the explanation. And nobody will be able to argue with that because the evidence will be right there in front of them. This is the path I'm inviting you to walk. The path of the quiet builder. The path of the private practitioner. The path of the person who understands that real transformation happens in the dark, in the silence, in the moments when nobody's watching. It's not the easy path. It's not the popular path. But it's the path that actually leads somewhere. So here's my challenge to you. Take that goal you identified earlier, the important one, the one that matters, and commit to 30 days of silence, 30 days of private work, 30 days of showing up without announcement, without applause, without external validation. Just you and the work. Do that for 30 days and see what happens. See how it feels to keep a promise to yourself without broadcasting it. See how your energy changes when you're not spending it on performance. See how your relationship with yourself deepens when you're building self-trust instead of seeking external approval. I think you'll be surprised. I think you'll discover capabilities you didn't know you had. I think you'll find that you're stronger, more disciplined, more capable than you thought. Because you've always been those things. You just needed to stop performing long enough to actually be them. And after those 30 days, you can decide whether to continue in silence or to bring someone into partnership. You can decide when and how to share. But you'll make that decision from a place of strength, from a foundation of evidence, from the confidence of someone who's already done the work. Not from a place of seeking approval, not from a place of needing validation, but from a place of quiet certainty. That's the place I want you to operate from. That's the person I want you to become. Someone who doesn't need to announce because their life announces for them. Someone who doesn't need to explain because their results explain everything. Someone who's comfortable with silence because they know what they're building in that silence. You're not broken. You're not behind. You're not failing because you haven't announced your plans to the world. You're exactly where you need to be. Your silence isn't weakness, it's focus. Your privacy isn't shame, it's wisdom. You don't owe the world an explanation of where you're going. You owe yourself the dignity of getting there. So stop talking, start working, stop performing, start practicing, stop announcing, start achieving. Let your results do the speaking. Let your transformed life do the testifying. Let your evidence do the explaining. And when people ask you how you did it, when they marvel at your transformation, when they want to know your secret, just smile. And if you choose to share anything at all, share this. I stopped talking about what I was going to do, and I started doing it. I worked in silence. I let the results speak. That's the wisdom. That's the path. That's the way forward. Now, if something I've said today has resonated with you, if you've felt the truth of these principles, I'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment and tell me one goal you're going to stop talking about and start working on. Just one sentence. Make that commitment public in that small way, and then go make it real in private. And if you want more of this kind of honest, principle-based wisdom, subscribe to this channel. I'm here to help you build a life of substance, not just appearance. A life of real transformation, not performed transformation.